Is that now? The one thing I wanted to say before we start the PowerPoint was that for all of you that view this after today, which is Saturday, if you have not yet signed up with your project for November, you certainly can do it now, and we would appreciate seeing people doing it so we have an idea what kind of crew we're going to have out there doing. I think I'm looking so far, it looks like there's about 25, but I think there's several people that did Camp NaNo, and I'm thinking some of them certainly must be going to be doing National Novel Writing Month as well. So,
yep.
And we'll say the big thing, yes, the challenge is to write 50,000 words, but even if you don't get 50,000 words, if you get 10,000 or 20 or 30, at least you will have something at the end of November. So
that's 5 or 10 or 15,000 words you didn't have when you started.
That's correct. So today our PowerPoint is plot, and I put other glitches because I never go whole hog into plot. I can't seem to spend a whole PowerPoint on it, but there are some other things that I think that as a NaNo participant, you may be thinking about or wondering about when you write your story. So here we go, plot and other glitches.
Okay. As intimidating as it seems, plot is simply the movement of your characters through time and over the course of your book, which means that by having characters in your book, you're guaranteed to have a plot. The plot may be subtle, or it may be the kind of thing that causes people to walk into trees because they couldn't put your book down. Chris Brady, no plot, no problem.
Yes, there he is, the man who started the whole thing. And if you really don't think you can do it, read No Plot, No Problem. It reads fast. You could sit down and read it in 2 days easily, probably in an afternoon easily. But it always, to me, it encourages you, and I know it has other people who've read it. John Gardner, in his book, The Art of Fiction, says plot usually comes to a writer in 3 ways. He borrows from a traditional story or action from life. He works backwards from his climax, or he works forward from an initial situation. That what if question that we talked about in the first session. And I can't see the bottom to see what it says under my Harry Potter page.
It says, what if a young boy learns he is a wizard?
Okay. I don't know why this is at the bottom and I can't see, but okay.
Yeah, I've done a lot of what if, and it's a great place to start. I like it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think borrowing is something that's very common. Obviously, when you think about people borrow from Shakespeare all the time. I mean, how many stories of Romeo and Juliet have we seen? In everything from serious love stories to lighthearted comedies, they have borrowed that plot line from Romeo and Juliet.
And that's not the only one. There's a whole bunch of them. There's yeah,
Hamlet's a big one. There's
Hamlet's a big one, and it's not just Shakespeare. When I was a teenager, my favorite movie was this movie with Ali Sheedy called Made to Order, and it was literally a Cinderella story.
Yeah, yes, fairy tales are popular too. A lot of fairy tales make for a lot of plots.
So it's said that every plot can be reduced to one of these 3, either man versus man, man versus God, or man versus nature. And whether man versus himself is nature or man, that's up for debate.
Yeah, I know. I was making some notes, and I don't know if I wrote any down for this one. But as I was going through, I also when you go looking for plots, you can find up. I know I found one site that gave me like 35 plots. Well, that to me has always been way too many to think about. So I do also look at 2 7-plot descriptions that I have used, and I think
we have them coming up.
Yep, we have them coming up, and I think they're good ones. But as I was going through them and thinking about books or movies or things that they fit, that this particular plot fit, I thought, most of those can also very easily fit into just these three.
Yep.
They're just kind of extensions of these three.
Yeah, just more in-depth, detailed descriptions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I had the pictures before of which were which, man versus God, I think I had Frankenstein, because if man is creating life, he's kind of like going
Yep.
against God. And man versus nature, I think Moby Dick, because it's out there, the man trying to get the whale.
Yeah,
And man versus man, I think I had the Hunger Games.
probably. Another
Uh,
man versus nature would be something like Volcano, where it's a natural disaster that you're battling.
right, right. So, but those are three that come to mind that are books that I would slot into those places. I think to me, Man versus God is the hardest one, but I think in another place it saw not just man versus God, but like man versus fate. Fits into that man versus God one.
Yeah.
You're going against your fate, which probably kind of. So a
And
lot of the Greek stories are man versus fate.
yeah.
Or probably not just the Greek, the Norse and the Roman and all those you can find them.
All the basic theology, no matter what the region or the origin, and I can't remember
Yeah, the origin
culture,
stories type
the
things. Yeah,
culture of origin. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
So, okay. And some of the 7 plot-driven.
the plot driven, overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. Those are the 7 plot driven ones. And a lot of times, and we were discussing this ahead of time, is that a lot of time you can look at them and think, okay, this one fits this and it fits this. And
So like your
so,
main plot might be one, but your subplots are something else.
yeah. Or maybe you think, okay, it fits that one, but it also fits that one. I mean,
Yeah.
my big one of my big ones is always the Lord of the Rings, because the Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings could be overcoming the monster, because that's part of what's going on there, right? They're trying to get rid of, but it's also a quest, it's that. And
Voyage
there's
and
a
return.
lot of, and of course, any overcoming the monster can be any of the Dracula stories, any of the Superman, Batman, all of those fit into the overcoming the monster stories. Um, I have Watchers listed here. I don't know why, but I guess
Oh, the monster. Oh, that's the monster in Watchers by Dean Koontz.
Yep, right. That's why I wrote it down, because it's about anything that's a monster. Or I have Silence of the Lambs written down. That's an overcoming the monster too. So
That would also be a man versus man, because man is the monster.
right, and the character is going after the monster, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So rags to riches, I don't have as many written down. I have Jane Eyre written down. I think any of those kind of stories and a lot of stories from that particular Victorian age kind of fit in there.
That's another one that Cinderella would fit in.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Those kind of things. Snow White, Cinderella, all of those kind of fit in there.
Yep.
And the quest, of course, I said Lord of the Rings to me is a big quest story. Both from the main character and from the other characters in the stories that have other things. I mean, they're helping with the main quest, but they also have their own
voyage, their own destination they're headed for.
I have Clan of the Cave Bear down here as.
Yep. It would be a quest.
Yeah.
You could even say Hunger Games was a quest, the quest to get through and survive.
Right. Well, and that's an overcoming the monster as well, right?
Yeah.
In a way where the monster is the government or whatever, not an actual monster.
Capital, yeah.
Yeah. And I have the alchemist, and I remember I made a sign here. I drew arrows here that the alchemist fit in the quest and it fit in rebirth. both places. So that's, so then we have the Voyage and Return, and always my big one for this was Alice in Wonderland. You know, that was, that's, I also wrote down Gulliver's Travels, because obviously that's,
Lord of the Rings fits in Voyage and Return as well.
right, right. Yeah, well, that's what I mean, Voyage and Return, that's where that one fits. I would think maybe Mark Twain's a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court fits fits into the either a quest or a Voyage and Return. Kind of think that's a Voyage and Return story.
I think so. Voyage and Return, you could also put Outlander in that.
Great. Yeah, that would fit in some of those too as well. Then next we have comedy on the list. Bridget Jones's Diary always fits in there. I put down Next Year Will Be Different. I don't know how many are familiar with that. That's a Maeve Binchy story, and they're actually short stories set at Christmas time, and they're humorous because in them something happens to the characters that means things are going to be different next year, you know.
Okay.
It's a good story, and I just watched yesterday Love Actually. I think it fits in comedy. I mean, it was a very, I don't know if you've ever watched, anybody's watched it. I've had a couple of places. I think somebody at Christmas time said that's their favorite Christmas story, and it's a great love story. So, and it's funny, so it would fit in any of them. Next we have tragedy. And I put The Fault Is in Our Stars as one I've had for years.
It is.
I also put In Cold Blood, although In Cold Blood is kind of creative nonfiction or narrative nonfiction. It's, you know, the story in the end is really a tragedy, you know, to me. So I think it fits there. And I put The Kite Runner because that's kind of a very tragic story.
Well, and then you going back to Shakespeare, you have Romeo and Juliet, which is another tragedy.
It is a tragedy, yeah. So is Hamlet. I mean, so there's a lot of, other than some of his crazy stories, a lot of his stories are tragedies, because Macbeth is a tragedy, and as well. And then for rebirth, one of my favorites is always The Shawshank Redemption.
Yep.
Which I always remind people that Stephen King wrote.
Yes.
I put in there A Man Called Ove. I know several people in our book group, we read that. And when you read that story, that's a man that goes from being a disgruntled widower. His wife has just died. He actually keeps trying to commit suicide to at the end, figuring out that has people out there who care about him and he can help them and all kinds of things. Of course, A Christmas Carol always fits there.
It does. And I have one that you probably haven't thought about. The Quiet Man.
Quiet Man. It's been a long time, so it would have. I put Les Miserables down there. I think that it's a rebirth story too about.
Yeah, The Quiet Man. He was an American boxer in Ireland who meets a girl and she hates the fighting, so he courts her and quits fighting.
Ah, okay. And I also put Forrest Gump there.
Yep, I can see that.
So pretty much, I think that's all the books that I wrote down while I was looking through trying to figure out what, and like I said, a lot of times you could say, well, it fits here and it also fits there and it also fits there. So sometimes plots are complicated, maybe I'd say.
They are. Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. By the order of the author per G.G., Chief of Ordnance, from Mark Twain, Adventures of Huck Finn.
I love that particular quote that, you know, I would guess that if I were going to think this about the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, it's kind of a quest and it's kind of a rebirth story as well.
Yeah.
No. So we could be shot if he was still around, I guess, for just saying we think there's a plot there.
Oh, there is, but it's more character driven than plot driven.
It is more character driven. And I think he was being facetious anyway.
Sure.
That's pretty typical Mark Twain. We have the 7 character driven plots. Man versus man, man versus nature, man versus God, religion, faith. That's where I put that in there. Man versus the environment, man versus machinery, technology, man versus self, and man versus supernatural. And of course, these could all be women as well as men.
Yeah. And again, these could all be boiled down to the first 3.
Right. As we said, yeah, that they could be. So when I looked at these, man versus man, I have the Da Vinci Code.
Yep.
As man versus man. I have, and there's where I have any hero or villain story. You know, Batman.
Yeah.
It's in there. The Handmaid's Tale
Mm-hmm.
is a man versus man. It's actually woman, but
Yeah.
I was saying that's an example. And then for man versus nature, always one of my big one was Old Man and the Sea. Obviously, Moby Dick always fits in there. A Life of Pi, I came upon. It's one. Yep. Into the Wild. And one of my favorite movies, and I think it was a book, I can't think of who the author was Deliverance, which is obviously that's the 4 guys in a canoes against the backwoods of, what was it, Tennessee?
Or Tennessee or Virginia, I'm not certain.
There's a Tennessee Valley Authority, I think, but I don't know if it was in Tennessee itself, but you get the idea of where it came from. I also have Congo in there. That's one of Michael Crichton's books.
Yep, I've read that one.
Yeah. I think I only have a couple of his books I haven't read. And then a Man versus God or Fate or Religion. One of my first ones is Fahrenheit 451, because that's man kind of fighting against his fate in that story, although and actually could call that a tragedy, because in the end the people that are fighting don't win. So
yeah,
but it fits. I put The Handmaid's Tale there again because that's kind of that's the people going against their fate, the women going against that fate. What else do I have in there? Invasion. I think that's another Michael Crichton story. It's Invasion.
I want to say so.
Yeah. Man versus the Environment. I have the Pelican Brief.
Yep.
There. I have the Andromeda Strain, which is another Michael Crichton, one of his real old ones, but that's kind of like today, the the strain of bacteria gets loose. And one that's more of a children's one is Hoot. That's by Carl Hassan, and he wrote that for that reason, which that's not something we usually do.
Another one that would fit in there would be Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yep. Yeah, just about, probably even when you think about it, King Kong fits there, right? Isn't it? Kind of an unusual environment, but it kind of fits. We have Man versus Machine. I have another Michael Crichton. This one's called Prey. If you haven't watched that, I have Watchers here again, because again, we're talking about
technology,
something that was going on. I have Brave New World.
I can picture one, and I'm trying to remember the name of it.
I have Mortal Fear written down here. That's by Greg Iles, I believe, and it's a technology one. It's been a long time since I read it, but it was about computer type stuff going on.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe we'll come back to it? Man versus Self. Always the big one. I always have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's one man fighting against himself, actually. It's 2 characters that are coming out. I actually put The Shining in here because I think the main character in The Shining is fighting against himself.
Yep, I can see that.
I put Lord of the Flies.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. Hamlet fits here. This is a young man who's trying to, he's trying to figure things out, And then Man versus the Supernatural, I put The Exorcist. That one always fits really well.
Yes.
I put The Green Mile because that is one where something unusual, something supernatural is going on in that story.
Another Stephen King book.
Another Stephen King book.
Okay.
In
The man and machine that I was thinking of was War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds. Yeah. Probably H.G. Wells, most of his stuff would probably fit in there. And this was very early because this is before people even imagined computers, and he wrote about submarines before there were submarines and a lot of things like that. So many of his books fit in that Man versus the Machine or technology. I think that's all I have on that. Those particular plots.
Well, Man versus Supernatural and Self could also be Outlander. I mean, she's battling the back and forth between the stones to go on with her life.
Right. Well, yeah, I would guess any story where you have time travel is kind of fits in the, the time traveler's wife. And yeah, a lot of those, they're going to H.G. Wells because he wrote the Time Machine. And so, yeah, those are stories, time traveling stories would tend to fit in when that Man versus the Supernatural. Because normally every time, what is the one with, they made them Planet of the Apes?
Oh, yes.
Would fit, all those stories would fit very good with Man versus the Supernatural.
Yep.
And I suppose they could fit with Man versus Nature since they were fighting apes.
Or environment.
Or the environment, yeah, any of them, yeah. So there's a lot of places they fit, and I don't think you need to have to really worry about where they fit, just your plot, get that idea, whether you steal it from a fairy tale, you start at the end and then write the beginning, or you have that what if, which I think that's, at least for me, it's the what if that then carries the story on, even though some of these other things may pop up in my story as well.
Yep, me too. I do a lot of what if.
I've been reading this Writing Without Rules, and he has an interesting chapter because we talk about being either a plotter or a pantser, and he calls himself a plantser. In other words, you combine both.
Yep.
Okay,
your plot will fall into place as one day at a time you listen to your characters carefully and watch them move around doing and saying things and bumping into each other. Anne Lamott from Bird by Bird.
And I put this picture here of the Lord of the Rings because, number one, Lord of the Rings has lots of characters, and these characters move around and bump into each other and do things and create a story. So
yep.
I think those are good examples when you want to think about characters. If you haven't ever read The Lord of the Rings, you should.
And they're not that big. There's a lot of story packed into some pretty small books.
Well, the Lord of the Rings, if you read the whole thing, rather than they made 3 movies out of it, but the book itself is just one book. I actually have a copy on my shelves here somewhere, and but they're nothing like George R.R. Martin's. Which there's another man who has many characters that are moving around and bumping into each other, and you're killing them off, and do you have them? He's got 7 books or something like that. That's all that one series.
I think so.
Yeah. So subplots. Subplots are miniature stories woven into the main story, complete and intriguing in their own right, serving to contrast, reinforce, or divert attention from the main plot. These mini plots contain beginnings, middles, and ends, and support the protagonist's emotional growth, further the dramatic action, and reflect or echo the significance of theme and premise. And that was Jessica Morrell. That's again, and I don't know if I did it again, but I gather one that Lord of the Rings is very good about that. The main plot of that story is Frodo has the ring and he's told he needs to destroy it. So that's the main plot of the story. You find that out right in the beginning. But then you have all these other characters that come in and they help him, but they also have their own little stories going on as well. You have the love story between Aragon and Arwen. You have the Gimli, the dwarf, who's trying to recover his kingdom that they have lost, and many other, and the elves.
And
There's just lots of subplots in the story.
Aragorn avoiding the throne. There's a huge amount of them.
Yeah. And you have the big battle at the end for Middle Earth. So, that's part of the story as well.
Speaking of Lord of the Rings.
Yes, here we are. Keep your subplots focused. Your subplot should always ultimately relate back to the main purpose and drive of the story. So ask yourself questions about the purpose of your subplots. How does this subplot support the story's themes? What does your subplot add in terms of characterization? How does this subplot alter the main plot for the better? What does this subplot convey that couldn't be conveyed in a more condensed way, for example, within one scene? And yeah, you see, I put the Lord of the Rings, and that's Aragon, Gimli, Legolas in that picture. And they're not the only ones that have subplots in the story, because we have you have the ants, the trees, and you have more about the elves in the story as well.
The two hobbits, Merry and Pippin, and their stories.
Merry and Pippin and Samwise.
And the wizard.
Gandalf, yes. So you have a lot of characters and each have their little things going on.
Yep. Remember, plot is no more than footprints left in the snow after your characters run by on their way to incredible destinations. Plot is observed after the fact rather than before it. It cannot precede action. That's Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, I always love this plot. I always include it because I love the picture, number one. And I love the thought is that for those of even for the people that would call themselves plotters, and I think when I say plotters, I do not necessarily mean you're thinking about a plot. I'm thinking about you're the kind of person that sits down and writes an outline, puts your story points in. That's your plotting, but it's not so much about plot.
It's more about planning.
It's more like planning, yes. But when you write your story, that plot just in many ways happens. I mean, you may have that basic idea. I don't know what J.A.R. Tolkien thought. Maybe his thought was, okay, there's this ring and it's important and it needs to be destroyed. I mean, that may have been his idea. It may have been the plot. And then, okay, how was he going to figure out how to do that? Well, I don't know how he did that. That may have been his idea, but he may just have thought about hobbits and thought, okay, these are cute little creatures and what's their point?
It started with elves because he wrote the books as backstory for the Elvish language that he'd already written.
That's correct. That's right. He did do that. So that's kind of interesting because it starts, he wrote it. Yeah. It's an interesting concept that off of one thing came this other story.
Yep.
Complete story. Yeah. Okay. Backstory may be the source of why. Backstory, background story, backstory, or background is a set of events invented for a plot, presented as preceding and leading up to that plot. It is a history of characters and other elements that underlie the situation existing at the main narrative start. Even a purely historical work selectively reveals backstory to the audience. So we're talking here about this is a story that you may include some, you may include a lot, you may include very little. But if you have a backstory, and you're going to have your characters, they're going to have had a life before you start putting them on the page, but you may not reveal all of that to the reader. But you know it, so that it helps determine how your character is going to behave.
One of my favorites, Story Genius, and I cannot remember the woman who wrote its name. I want to say Lisa something. You start creating your characters by creating their backstory so that you know more about how they would react to something and why, because of their backstory and what formed them. Really, really like that one. It makes how
Yeah.
your characters would react in a situation much easier. And thank you, Gretchen. Yes, it's Lisa Cron.
No.
Okay.
I know I have it on the shelf somewhere.
Yes, I have it. I knew it was Lisa, but I could not remember the last name. Backstories are usually revealed partially or in full, chronologically or otherwise, as the main narrative unfolds. However, a story creator may also create portions of a backstory or even an entire backstory that is solely for their own use.
And I chose these 3 books, all 3 which I've read, excuse me. Wished I'd written them. 2 of them, Before We Were Yours and The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, have a lot of backstory in them, which a lot of big writers will say that you shouldn't put a lot of backstory in. However, I've seen several books recently that use it. And Before We Were Yours, we have a young woman who is finding out about her grandmother's past, and then it jumps in time from more the current time to back to the 50s and tells the story of what was going on then. And I believe it was in Kentucky is the setting, and where this group was actually taking children from poor parents and then letting well-off people adopt them. And that really did happen. So it's kind of, she's got both stories. She's got what's going on with her trying to find out her family history. And then we get this family history in the background. And in The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet is also set the story in the current time. It's a young man in, I want to say San Francisco. I know it's on the West Coast. And he's lived in this neighborhood that was an Asian neighborhood, and he had a Japanese friend. And of course, so it jumps back and forth between the current time and what happened at the time of World War II when the Japanese were taken off to the internment camps. So it goes between those 2 kind of stories. And, he's wondering about this young woman that he cared very much for when he was a kid. And then Poldark, I think his backstory is, you get a little of it in the beginning, and then you get a little bit about it. But a lot of, I think, Poldark's backstory you don't know, but what little you know does, or what the author himself knew, creates what Poldark himself does. How he acts and how he behaves and all that.
Yeah, that's like, you got to know how the character's history to know how he reacts and how he behaves in a situation. Okay.
And here's where I found some backstories. I thought this was a little fun. I didn't know much about Peter Pan's backstory, and I don't know that unless you read some of the stuff besides the story most of us read, you don't know that he ran away when he was little, and when he came back, he saw a new baby and believed his parents no longer wanted him, so he never came back. So that's Peter Pan's backstory. That he ran away. When he came back, he thought his parents didn't want him. So there we have it. Go ahead.
Gollum was a store hobbit of the river folk who lived in the Gladden Fields. Originally known as Smeagol, he was corrupted by the One Ring and later named Gollum after his habit of making a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. Smeagol obtained the ring by murdering his relative Daegel, who found it in the River Anduin.
And I think you get a little bit of this. This is one in Lord of the Rings, and maybe in The Hobbit as well, that you get a little bit of the backstory a little bit at a time. So you figure out that he was a hobbit, because I think the first time I read it, I didn't realize until quite a ways on in the story that he originally had been a hobbit before he stole the ring and the ring. And
Possessed him.
then he becomes this creature hiding, you know, the ground. And then we have Batman's secret identity as Bruce Wayne, a wealthy playboy philanthropist and oh, my CEO, I forgot.
Yeah.
And CEO of Wayne Enterprises. Batman originated from an incident in Bruce's childhood. After witnessing the murder of his parents, he swore vengeance against criminals, an oath tempered by a sense of
Justice.
justice. I put this picture of Batman and Joker because they, you know, Joker has a little backstory too. I don't think we know too much about it. I think I tried to figure it out, and he was kind of almost like he was bullied when he was younger, and kind of so then he became kind of a bad guy.
Yep.
Because of that.
Read, read, read. Read everything. Trash, classics, good and bad. See how they do it. When a carpenter learns his trade, he learns by observing. Read, you'll absorb it. Write, if it's good, you'll find out. If it's not, throw it out the window. From Interview with the Western Review by William Faulkner.
Yeah, we have to read, and I know it will be said again in this PowerPoint, because I get that kind of advice from all kinds of writers.
Yeah. So 5 or 6 years ago, my dad asked me, how many books would you estimate that you've read in your entire life? And I thought about it, and I'm like, you know, somewhere around 10,000. And he's like, you really think it's that high? Apparently, he had one of our cousins ask him, and the cousin believed he'd read about 3,000. My dad's estimate was 10 to 12,000. We've always been big readers. But I know I went several years where I was reading more than 300 books a year. And that was just novels or whatever. That was just what I was keeping track of, not counting school books or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I'm on my Goodreads site. I'm close to 1,800, but I didn't start keeping track until like 1994. So I read a lot when I was a kid, and I'm like you, I'm a big reader. I don't think I ever read 300 a year. I did have a friend who reads that way, but
well,
I do like to read. I read a lot.
2 years ago, when I spent that summer up in the mountains, in 5 months, I read over 200 books.
Yeah. Well, if all I did was read.
So yeah.
I don't read with the intensity I used to. Okay, the next thing, point of view. POV, in other words, in whose perspective you tell your story.
And if you do split point of view, one of the things that was put to me that never occurred to me, you're thinking, whose point of view do I tell this story in? Who has the most to lose? And now I'm like, that makes a lot of sense, but it had never occurred to me till someone asked, in this particular scene, who has the most to lose? That's whose point of view you tell the story from.
So you're saying that even if you tell it from more than one point of view in a particular scene, it can still be that scene who has the most to lose. Am I right?
Exactly. Yes. So you say you've got a scene with 3 characters and you're using a multiple point of view. You're using all 3 characters' point of views. Which one do you choose to tell this particular scene?
Makes sense.
The one who has the most to lose. And it does. It just had never occurred to me until someone said that to me. Point of view is the mode through which, I've got something over the screen. So the mode through which, I can't read that. What does it say, Chris?
Through which a novel's narrator tells the story.
Okay.
There are 3 general POV modes.
First person point of view, we use the pronouns I and we. I ran through the woods, tearing through the branches and tripping over roots. This is the point of view that Hunger Games is told from. Second person POV uses the pronoun you. You run through the woods, tearing through the branches and tripping over roots. I know there are a few books written in second person. I cannot name any of them.
I did. There's a note. I do make a note at the bottom of this that says that second person point of view is more for middle grade readers. You know, those who choose your own adventure books, which I didn't. I should have gone and looked. I'm guessing we're talking about probably kids that are 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe 8th graders, somewhere in that they will read in that point of view.
Probably. I know I was reading Choose Your Own Adventure about 3rd grade, so yeah, right in there.
Yeah. Third
person uses the pronouns he, she, it, or they, or a name. She runs through the woods, tearing through branches and tripping over roots. Third is what I use most frequently. I've done a couple of first person, but third, and it took a little while to transition to the third, but that is what I write in most frequently.
Yeah, I find third person to be, that's the one I write in, and I find it easier because, and I don't even know that when I write a personal essay, I would write for first person. That makes much sense.
Yeah.
But when you're writing a book and you have to think about, if you're writing a first person and you only have your main character that you're using that point of view, you have to be so careful about what do they know and what don't they know, and how can you show what they don't know. I mean, there's ways you can do it using dialogue and things, but, or maybe even backstory, but you have to be careful that you don't
reveal something that they don't know.
That's right. Right. Because it happened to another character, it didn't happen to them and they weren't there. So
exactly.
Writers must be readers. If you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. Every book you pick up has its own lesson or lessons, and quite often the bad books have more to teach than the good ones. And that's why I put 50 Shades of Grey here.
Now, wasn't that a Stephen King thing? The quote?
What,
no, not 50 Shades, the quote.
Who? I don't know what I didn't put who it was there, and I don't know why. I maybe forgot, but I know why I put 50 Shades of Grey there.
Yeah, me too. I read about 50 pages of that and threw it away.
I read it. I think I read them all, but I went, this could have been one maybe good book and not 3 poor books.
Yep. So.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
how to introduce your characters. You can use straightforward description. Think Harry Potter. It was a skinny, black-haired, bespectacled boy who had the pinched, slightly unhealthy look of someone who has grown a lot in a short space of time. His jeans were torn and dirty, his t-shirt baggy and faded, and the soles of his trainers were peeling away from the uppers. So here you meet Harry Potter. I think that, when you read that description, you can see that, or I could, I'm sure most people can. You can see what that boy looks like. You can see the tall, probably his jeans, I would say they're probably not only, they're not just torn and dirty, but they're going to be high waiters, because he's going to have grown. It says he said he grew a lot, which probably means he hasn't gotten new jeans.
Yeah, Order of the Phoenix is the 5th one, so Harry is 15. We know that's growth spurt time.
Yep. So
yeah.
That is one way. You can just give a description. That's how to introduce them.
Yep. Or direct first person address, like Longmire. She might have knocked, but I didn't hear it because I was watching the geese. I watch the geese a lot in the fall, when the days get shorter and the ice traces along the rocky edges of Clear Creek. The sheriff's office in our county is an old Carnegie building that my department inherited when the Absaroka County Library got so many books they had to live somewhere else. We've still got the painting of Andy out in the landing of the entryway. Every time the previous sheriff left the building, he used to salute the old robber baron. I've got a large office in the South Side Bay, which allows me an unobstructed view of the Bighorn Mountains to my right and the Powder River Valley to my left. The geese fly down the valley south. with their backs to me, and I usually sit with my back to the window. But occasionally I get caught with my chair turned. This seemed to be happening more and more lately.
Yeah, I kind of liked this description. You can see Sheriff Longmire's beat number one irreverent. He calls Andrew Carnegie Andy, and also you see he's a man that likes to. I would see him as a man he's looking out the window, and he's looking at what's out there, but he's also thinking. Even though it doesn't say anything that other than that very last line, he seems to be happening more and more lately. You get the idea that there's a lot on his mind.
Yeah.
That's why he's looking out the window. That helps him.
It does. This is the first in the Longmire books. We're still getting to know Longmire in this one.
Right.
So, yeah.
And he gets so involved in that looking out the window. That's why I think he's probably thinking there's more going on than just looking out the window, is because he doesn't hear the secretary, I think it is, knock at his door. So I think you learn a lot about him just with a few little words.
Yep.
And you know what his setting is like, so you know what he is. He's a sheriff, even if you didn't know that.
Or by placing the character in a specific time and place. Robert Langdon awoke slowly. A telephone was ringing in the darkness, a tinny, unfamiliar ring. He fumbled for the bedside lamp and turned it on, squinting at his surroundings. He saw a plush Renaissance bedroom with Louis XVI furniture, hand-frescoed walls, and a colossal mahogany four-postered bed. Where am I? Where the hell am I? The jacquard bathrobe hanging on his bedpost bore the monogram, the Hotel Ritz, Paris. Slowly, the fog began to lift. From the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown.
So here we've got a man, and we know obviously he's obviously traveled somewhere where he isn't usually, because he wakes up not knowing where he's at.
Yeah.
And he's not in a cheap ass motel room. Because this is a Renaissance bedroom with Louis XVI furniture. So you get a real picture of probably the kind of man he's going to be, because, why did he get here? Now, he's not too sure how he got here.
And he's woken in the middle of the night. We know it because it's dark.
Right.
And the phone rings. So
yeah, and he's got that telephone ringing, so something's
up. Yep.
Yeah. So that gives you a whole idea of him. Showing the character in action. I love this. I just reread the very first Sherlock Holmes story recently when I downloaded all the works of all the stories of Sherlock Holmes, and I love this character. It says, I found it, he shouted to my companion, running toward us with a test tube in his hand. I have found a reagent which is precipitated by hemoglobin and by nothing else. Had he discovered a gold mine, greater delight could not have shown upon his features. Dr. Watson, Dr. Sherlock Holmes, said Stamford, introducing us. How are you? He said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive. How on earth do you know that? I asked in astonishment. Never mind, said he, chuckling to himself. The question now is about hemoglobin. No doubt you see the significance of this discovery of mine. It is interesting chemically, no doubt, I answered, but practically? Why, man, it is the most practical medical legal discovery for years. Don't you see that it gives us an infallible test for bloodstains? Come over here. He seized me by the coat sleeve in his eagerness and drew me over to a table at which he had been working. I love this showing how Sherlock Holmes behaved in the book, because I've always probably saw more Sherlock Holmes by watching Sherlock Holmes, movies, and with all the there used to be the old Sherlock Holmes that was on television all the time that I remember watching when I was younger. But reading this, and this is in the very first story, and it's when Dr. Watson meets Sherlock Holmes. His friend takes him there because they need a place. He needs a place to live, and Sherlock Holmes needs somebody to live with him so they can afford the place they're going to live in. And neither of them think anyone would want to live with them, but they end up living with each other. But I think you learn a lot about Sherlock Holmes. I mean, you get that intrigue of how does he know that Dr. Watson's been in Afghanistan? You will find that out later, how he figured that out and that whole thing. But it's how does he know that? And why is he so excited about finding, being able to find a test for hemoglobin? Which we have to remember that this was back in the 40s, maybe, that would have been set. I'm trying to think how maybe further back than that, the original Sherlock Holmes.
Okay. Or a report by other characters. My brother Jeremy is a 38-year-old bachelor who never did leave home. Long ago, we gave up expecting very much from him, but he is still the last man in our family, and you would think that in a time of tragedy, he might pull himself together and take over a few of the responsibilities. Well, he didn't. He telephoned my sister and me in Richmond, where we have a little apartment together. If memory serves me, it was the first time in his life he'd ever placed a call to us. Can you imagine? So when I heard his voice that night, I had trouble placing it for a moment. Amanda, he said. And I said, yes, who is it? That's Ann Tyler's Celestial Navigation.
Yeah, I think you get a very good idea, a picture of this man, a bachelor who's, who knows, who's obviously
who never left home.
Who never left home. Yeah, now we talk about the kids living in their basement. Well, this is very early because she wrote this book several years ago, but
yeah,
it would be comparative to that. So that's child that lives in the basement and doesn't pay for anything and doesn't take any responsibility, probably doesn't do his own wash yet, those kind of things.
Yep.
But you can very much see that this is the kind of character he is, or for sure that's what his sister thinks.
Yeah.
Read everything you can get your hands on. A writer should read while he is relaxed, because that is when the stuff he is reading sinks most deeply into his mind. Furthermore, reading should be his primary form of relaxation, not skiing or tap dancing or fishing or building model trains or watching television. This is from this is on page 60 of How to Write Best-Selling Fiction by Dean Koontz. And I think the parentheses are mine. I would add to the relaxation list playing video games. So in other words, if you want to be a writer, your primary form of relaxation, if you're not writing, should be reading. Not tap dancing.
Yeah, I love to read. I always have. And on these days, I will knit and read, but I read.
So when you knit, are you listening?
No.
No.
A lot of times I can knit and put my book on my computer screen, and so I just hit a button to
yeah.
So yeah, I do that a lot.
Well, that's like me when I'm riding my exercise bicycle, I read. That's and which to me that's great because it makes that hour I spend on my bicycle go a lot faster if I'm reading something that's.
It does. Now I do audiobooks when I'm driving, and right now I'm driving roughly 10 hours a week back and forth to work. I'm going through a lot of audiobooks.
I'm guessing you're going through a couple books just driving back and forth to work.
Yep. And then I'll often keep my headphones in while I'm cooking and doing stuff like that. I'll go through a couple books a week. And honestly, the best place to find them is the library. They've got a huge, huge selection. You can download them.
That's true. I don't have Audible, so I haven't. Sometimes I get irritated because a book I want to read, they only have an audio book.
Yeah, I don't use Audible. I use the app on my phone that I use is called Libby. Libby is the app for your phone that goes through the library system and the overdrive. Easy. Once you're signed in, it'll download the books. It'll do ebooks as well, but it'll download your audiobooks and you can play it right there. I love it. It's easy.
I'm guessing I could probably put that on my Kindle too, right?
Oh, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can put it on Fire.
that I can put that on there too. That would be a place, because I'm watching Patrick Melrose
Mm-hmm.
series right now. And I was noticing a lot of times when I see a series like that and I see it's based on a certain book or books, I think, oh, I'd like to read the book. And I went and looked, and the only way they had them, I think the only way they had them were Audible books. That series. That they had other books by him that were just regular books, but
So one of the
regular.
things you can do is download the audiobook to your Kindle and then
Mm-hmm.
have Alexa play it to you.
Well, yeah, but my husband wouldn't like that.
um, yeah, I do a lot of audiobook listening. I did all of the Longmire series. Now I'm
Mm-hmm.
working through all of the Virgin River series.
Well, and I appreciate it. I mean, I have a friend who has vision problems, and for her, it's if we start talking about a book that we've read, there's three of us that meet. If we start talking about it, she will go right away to see if it's available as an audiobook, because
Yep.
reading is too hard on her eyes
Yep.
anymore.
So, description is what makes the reader a sensory participant in the story. Good description is a learned skill, one of the prime reasons why you cannot succeed unless you read a lot and write a lot. It's also important to know what to describe and what can be left alone while you can get it on with your main job, which is telling the story. Description begins in a writer's imagination, but it should end in the reader's. And that's Stephen King.
Yeah, and I picked this picture because I thought this is a good graphic to show. Here's this young man reading, and I'm imagining this is what he's seeing in his mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's Treasure Island or if it's some other seagoing story. It certainly could be Treasure Island or one of those.
Yep.
That one comes to mind because I read it so much when I was a kid. But one of the things I've been reading, I'm reading this Writing Without Rules, and he was talking about one of the things, and one of the things he says is one of the biggest mistakes writers make when dealing with setting is how specific they get. They drill down to the molecular structure of everything in every room, offering up drowning waves of detail for one or two reasons. Either they think it adds to the verisimilitude, or they can't think of what to write and are stalling. And he also in this chapter says a lot about, you don't need to give your reader necessarily a lot of information. I mean, we talk about using all five senses, but he says, how often do you think about all of those? Do you go in a room and smell what it smells like? Well, no. Obviously, if there's an odor that's particular in a room, if there's something baking or whatever, or maybe like I always notice my husband's cologne when he comes out of the shower. But a lot of those things you don't notice, and a lot of it you can maybe just hint at some of those things and let the reader form their own picture, which is.
It is. I try to stick to one or two things. What are the one or two, maybe three things that jump out at you? And I know I'm strange, but sometimes I walk into a room and I can hear a light bulb buzzing.
I think I hear one right now. No, that might be my ears ringing.
Or, like you said, you walk into the room and one smell jumps out at you. Or one thing you notice, a painting on the wall, one or two things. You're not going to go through and inventory the whole room.
Right.
But you'll have one or two things that jump out at you.
And it's good to let your reader use his imaginations. I mean, I like description in a book, but when they overdo it, then it makes me tired. I tend to skip it if they get. It's as much as I love Diane Gabaldon, sometimes she's that way to me.
Yes, and usually about really boring stuff like botany or
Yeah, or the color of Jamie's hair.
Yeah. But you mentioned Clan of the Cave Bear earlier. She would get down to minute descriptions of the grass or wagon wheel type thing. Now, there weren't any wagons in that, but that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It was just, yeah. Yes, and description was, I think and I don't know if it's just a change in what we notice, or if the change is because we've had movies and television, but I think writers older, when you look back, probably even more than 50 years, maybe 75 years, writers did put a lot of description in. But I think nowadays people are so used to visual and seeing things in their mind that you don't have to tell them that much. You tell them a little bit about a character and you let them imagine, or a setting, and you let them imagine it for itself. Or you don't even have to tell them that much for that matter.
Yep.
Just let them put their own, like Stephen King says, just tell the story.
Yep. A unifying theme is a requirement of good fiction, but when it becomes the primary purpose, then the author is writing either an essay or a sermon, but not a piece of fiction. This leads to pedantic, preachy prose that is about as popular in the bookstores as the Edsel was on automobile showrooms. In fact, your book's theme should be suggested by the plot and not the other way around. The story comes first. Again, Dean Koontz, How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. I've not read Prince of Tides here, but I'm reminded of The Sixth Sense, the movie with Bruce Willis.
Uh-huh.
You go all the way through it and you didn't realize it till the end when it was pointed out that everything he touched when he was angry was red.
Yeah. It's been a while since I read The Prince of Tides, but it's kind of a story about brother, sister, family relationships. And I'm not real fond of those kind of stories.
Yeah.
And another one I think of, and it always amazes me, because when I read Little Women when I was a girl, I thought it was great. When I read it a few years ago, I thought it was preachy.
This does not surprise me.
Yeah, because their mother is always preaching. And
yeah.
I thought, I just didn't notice that when I was young, I guess, but it's one that fits. And yeah, Prince of Tides is one I've had it before, and it's kind of, I think most of those family relationship type books, like, think of the one we read recently, and I didn't like it very well. Like, I don't like preachy books. So.
I get that. Okay.
Now this is a book with a theme that's fun. Hoot by Carl Hyacin. I'm not suggesting you want to be an author who tells a story to teach a moral or deliver a message. If you have a message, as Samuel Goldwyn said, send a telegram. A moral position is not a slogan or wishful thinking. It doesn't come from outside or above. It begins inside the heart of a character and grows from there. And I think probably Carl Hyacin does a good job of getting across the idea to protect the environment by telling actually a kid's story about an owl.
I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie that was based on it 40 bajillion times. My kids loved it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it had a theme, although I don't know if kids notice it, but it did have a theme, about protecting the environment. So
yep.
I think there's probably a lot of those kid type books, especially that are about animals and things like that, that are kind of have a theme, and that might have been the author's idea. He wanted it, something he wanted to get across. But I'm like the rest. I think I probably have themes in my book, but when I'm writing the book, I'm not thinking about a theme, and that's not why I'm writing it.
Yep. Cram your head with characters and stories. Abuse your library privileges. Never stop looking at the world, and never stop reading to find out what sense other people have made of it. If people give you a hard time and tell you to get your nose out of a book, tell them you're working. Tell them it's research. Tell them to pipe down and leave you alone. Jennifer Weiner.
And that is the end of this presentation.
It is. Now go pick up a book.
Yeah, and read.
Okay.